Hi, this is Chris Lamb. I'm chairman of the Department of Journalism and Public Relations at IUPUI, and welcome to the Jim Brown series of interviews where current students in journalism and public relations interview graduates of the program who have achieved success in journalism or public relations. In this segment, Camryn Daniels, a junior majoring in public relations, will interview Kate Guerra, Vice President of Marketing and Communications for the Tennessee Titans of the National Football League. It's my pleasure to introduce Camryn and Kate, and thanks to the both of you.
Hi, Kate. I'm Camryn. Like he said, I'm a journalism PR major. I'm a junior here. And I wanted to say thank you so much for coming to speak with me. I have a few questions here from my perspective as a journalism major, and hopefully from the perspective of other PR majors. Hopefully they'll find this interesting. So my first question for you is, you're the team publicist for the Tennessee Titans of the NFL. Your bio says that you publicize the team's off-the-field activities. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you do?
Sure, absolutely. So, Camryn, so great to meet you, and thank you so much for having me. First of all, it's great to be back chatting with IUPUI and all of the amazing students there. So, Camryn, when I started with the Tennessee Titans, I started in August 2019 as their team publicist. So what that means is I worked to actively relate to media, tell stories with media, both locally and nationally, here in Nashville and beyond, to talk about what the team was doing off the field. So that could be anything from something a player was interested in outside of football, really painting them more as people, getting individuals to connect more with them and who they are as a human being. Versus just, a really great football player. So personal interests of theirs, things that they were doing in the community, and then also painting a picture for people of who the Titans were outside of just a football team. So what are they doing in the community? Who are some of their executives? Who's the leadership behind the logo? And saw some success doing that in terms of just making people connect with more human interest stories around the team than just what was happening on the field.
Awesome. Okay, so you attended IUPUI in 2010. Why did you choose IUPUI to pursue your master's degree?
So first of all, heard wonderful things about IUPUI and the work they were doing. And at the time when I graduated from my undergraduate school, which was the University of Texas, I really wanted to pursue sports journalism, and I knew that sports was the lane that I wanted to be in. And at the time, IU School of Journalism, basing the program at IUPUI, was the only program in the country that was offering a master's in sports journalism. So you could go other places and you could get a master's in journalism and perhaps have a sports concentration of some kind. But I knew what I wanted to do. I knew that sports was my future, and I wanted something a little more specific. So I got in touch with the wonderful academic advisors related to the program and started chatting about what that program might look like. It was its inaugural season. It was in its first year of existence, and it was amazing to see the things that it offered students who were interested in pursuing that passion specifically.
Okay, wow. So what classes during your master's program prepared you for your professional career?
Oh gosh, there were so many. You know what? I honestly probably don't do too much of now that actually I feel like really benefited me, even though I don't directly do this work, was we learned how to cut video. So, and video editing. So that was an extremely helpful tool. Even though I'm not currently doing video editing, I have to work really closely with our production team when I want them to go cover an event that we're doing that perhaps doesn't make sense to invite media to in person because of logistics or parking or something else that's happening in the city that would prevent them from coming. So I'll ask our production team to come and create a B-roll package or a media melt or a video news release, depending on what you're used to calling that. And I'm able to kind of speak their language a little bit and talk to them about, how I'd like it shot and how I'd like it edited. And that is so helpful to them, especially for those that don't come from news backgrounds, to be able to hear it in that language. So I really enjoyed that class. I also took a broadcast journalism class that, again, even though that's not the field I ended up going into, I can sort of plug into, I have to host press conferences. So having that sort of that background, that base of knowledge of how to present myself on camera, it has been really helpful.
Wow. Yeah, I'm taking a visual communications class right now, and I don't see myself going into visual communications, but I feel like you said, it would be good to have that in my back pocket.
It's so helpful, even to, I know I was just saying a second ago that I knew I wanted to do sports journalism, and so that's what I pursued. But it's so helpful even if you go into classes or knowledge that you don't necessarily see yourself using in your professional career. You never know when it's going to come in handy. So I always encourage people to kind of go out of their comfort zone a little bit. The other thing too to think about is, I went into my master's program thinking that I was going to pursue career as a journalist. So whether that would be a writer or a broadcast personality, that's what I thought I would end up doing. And I ended up transitioning into PR and marketing. So you never know where your future is going to lead you, and so to have that base of knowledge in different areas could prove useful down the road.
So after you graduated, you spent 8 years at IndyCar with a few different positions. Can you explain a little bit about what you did there?
Sure. So it's a funny story, actually. Again, going back to the fact that I thought I was going to go in and pursue journalism, there was an internship that IndyCar was talking to the IUPUI Master's Program of Sports Journalism about, which was a PR internship. And I didn't apply for it because I was like, I'm not going into PR. And finally, Pam Losella, my academic advisor at the time, was sort of like, well, why don't you give it a shot? Like you're going to speak with a lot of journalists who are coming in to cover the Indianapolis 500. If you help them, if you make a good impression, you network with them, maybe they can help you find a position after, you've completed your program and you're done with your internship. So I resisted a little bit because I was kind of like, I'm going to be on ESPN. I'm not going into PR. But eventually, I took Pam's advice and I applied for that internship and I got it. And I just really enjoyed the kind of other side of things. I still felt like I got to be a storyteller in that I was working with a lot of journalists who didn't have a very large breadth of knowledge about IndyCar racing. Some did, but there were a lot of folks that did not, specifically didn't know anything about the drivers. So as I was able to work behind the scenes and get to know the series and the athletes and identify all of these storylines that no other person was seeing, not being sort of behind that curtain, I was able to, with permission from the athletes, take some of those stories and pitch them to media and say, hey, did you know that, this driver is a type 2 diabetic? Did you know that they're about to go pursue this reality show? Like all these things that nobody knew unless I kind of played a part in helping them find that story. So I really enjoyed that part of it. And I still got to write for the series website. And when I first started, I was also running all of their social media accounts. And that was a dream of mine, to be able to work for either a team or a league, write for their website and run their social media channels. So in my eyes, straight out of grad school, I felt like I'd landed my dream job and I felt very fortunate. So I was like, this is amazing. Why would I want to transition out of something that is literally exactly what I wanted to do? And then eventually, as I became more interested in the PR side of things, eventually ended up transitioning out of some of those roles and transitioned into some of their what they call media advancing. So I would take some of the drivers in the series to different cities that the series raced in, and we would do a full court press media tour with all of the TV stations, all of the newspapers, the radio stations, to promote the upcoming event, promote ticket sales, but also just grow awareness of the race in that market. And that was a lot to arrange. Not only, logistically, you have to think about how much time you need between point A and point B when you're on tours like that. You have to worry about hotels and transportation. But at the same time, you have to pitch those media members. They don't just, welcome you in. You have to sell them on why they should be covering your story that day versus another story that's happening in their market that day. So I found that to be a really fun challenge. With IndyCar not really being in that sort of mainstream sports sector as it used to be, maybe back in the 70s or 80s or so. It was a challenge to fight for some of those media hits, and I really enjoyed that part of it. So I did that for several years for the series, and then eventually kind of started a subsector of the PR department called National Media Outreach. I found that I felt things would be a lot better for the series if they were able to grow some national exposure of the sport and its drivers. So I would work on booking drivers on MTV and morning shows, late night shows, anything that would sort of get them out to a more pop culture audience to increase exposure of the series and its athletes. So it was a blast. I had a lot of fun doing that. Got to, did a lot of work in New York and LA and Chicago, a lot more national markets that I was able to build good relationships with. And those opportunities are really hard to get, especially again for a series that isn't one of the big three. So whenever something would pan out, it was always a really exciting day. So that's essentially from start to finish my 8 years at IndyCar.
Okay. So are there any differences doing PR in a major city like New York versus Indianapolis?
There are. And I think the first difference that I would point out is just people and culture. You kind of have to really learn how people operate in every media market. Every media market is different. There's no city that operates the same way as another city, really. So you really got to build relationships and take people out to coffee. And I'm making huge generalizations and really building off of stereotypes here. But the people in Indianapolis are different than the people in New York. The people in New York are different than the people in LA. And you kind of have to, get with the culture and the program as to how they like to be communicated with, what they're interested in and what they're not interested in. Obviously, with IndyCar being a huge part of the culture in Indianapolis, pitching a story in Indianapolis to a reporter is quite a bit easier than pitching a story to a national outlet in New York, because it's a lot more relevant in Indianapolis. So you just got to learn what sells and what doesn't. Certainly in New York, they're more interested in those human interest stories. Whereas in Indianapolis, you can pitch a much more racing specific story.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a lot of need to have a skill to adapt.
You do. Oh gosh, that's the biggest lesson that I try to, or thing that I try to impart on anyone that I'm speaking with, is just, if you want to work in journalism or in public relations, you have to be adaptable. I can't tell you how many times I've been on media tours where things just went really wrong. Whether it was, that TV hit that you were absolutely banking on calls you the morning of and cancels, or you get stuck in traffic, and you have to call, a really large media outlet and tell them you're not going to make it or you're going to be late. And there are things that could very easily incite panic, and you just have to kind of roll with the punches. And worry about what you can control, and just adapt to the next thing. So being adaptable is key.
Okay, so my next question for you is, at the Tennessee Titans, what does a typical day look like?
One of the things that I love about being in PR is that every day is completely different. But I'm sure you hear that a lot from journalists and public relations professionals. But if I had to kind of narrow it down on a typical day, I would say that I'm having a lot of meetings with the different departments within the organization, because my job is so focused, not what's happening during our games or during practice. It gives me a lot of flexibility to meet with our ticketing department, to meet with our sponsorship department, or to go have coffee with one of the players' publicists to learn about what their next charity event is, or if they're willing to do that photo shoot with the local lifestyle magazine. and just, keep those relationships up. But it's really kind of like a information mining day where I just try to meet with a lot of people and figure out what's coming up, because you'll find that not everybody, but people outside of public relations don't necessarily think about how you could publicize something, which may sound kind of self-explanatory and obvious, but I'll hear every day, I hear something that I'm like, how did you not think that we should publicize this? Yes, we should tell everybody about this. This is really cool that we're doing this. And so it's really, on you as the publicist, or whatever role that you're in at that time in communications, to go looking for that information and then try to package it in a way that would translate to media. So lots of meetings. And then inevitably, there's some fire drill that comes up, whether it's, a reporter looking for a statement on something or something that we weren't anticipating that just kind of pops up, that you always have to be prepared for. So sometimes the typical day of meetings can transition into, you're canceling all of your meetings and addressing something that came up that day. So every day is a little bit different.
So how do you keep all of your ducks in a row? It sounds like you have a lot of information coming in at every angle.
I'll be really honest with you that it's something that I'm still working on. It's extremely important to be organized. I've gotten a lot better at making sure I'm writing things down that I need to do or things that I need to follow up on. I have a few coworkers that I'm sort of, knocking on their doors to get some advice from them, because I look at their calendars and they're color coded and I'm like, how do I get in on that? Like, how do you train yourself to do that? Something that I've started to do is whenever I see a gap, as I've sort of moved up in leadership with the Titans, my schedule gets a lot more full. So sometimes I'll find myself in back-to-back meetings and really not have time to do actual things that I need to do, whether that's answer emails or write press releases. So I've been finding those gaps where, even if it's 30 minutes, just kind of shading that off for myself to say, okay, these 30 minutes, I'm either going to go get lunch or I'm going to answer emails, and I'm not going to take any meetings during this time, unless the big boss calls or something, drastic happens that I have to. But kind of setting that time aside for myself has been helping a lot so far. I actually have a little block after our interview today, so I'm excited to catch up on a few things.
Okay, well, I have one more question for you. During your time at IUPUI, did you receive any valuable advice from a professor that has stuck with you over the last 10 years?
Gosh, so much advice. I was a graduate fellow for Professor Losella when I was at IUPUI. And I really found it interesting. Some of the research that I did with her really focused around gender roles and how female athletes are often talked about differently in media. So reading through that research, maybe they're not called strong, they're called striking or pretty, or, there's just different ways. Oftentimes in articles, they're referred to by their first names instead of their last names, where you'll never see, when you're reading a story about Kevin Durant, you're not going to see a reporter saying, said Kevin, it's always going to be said Durant.
Yeah.
So that really opened my eyes up to things that I'm just very aware of now. And I feel like that has been a great sort of life lesson for me in terms of even, it's not just men who do that to women. Sometimes it's women talking about other women that way. So it's really trained myself to think about those things a little bit harder, especially being a young woman in sports. But also just the advice to not be afraid to take that public relations internship, even though I saw myself going into journalism. I think that was huge. I think if Pam hadn't sort of persuaded me to do that, and Tim Franklin, who was associated with the program at the time as well, also encouraged me to kind of go down that path and just see where it led. And it's led to some really amazing opportunities for myself. And I'm just so glad that they gave me that advice, not to worry about going out of your comfort zone and seeing where that lands you.
Okay, well, Kate, I want to say thank you so much for talking with me and for giving us some insight into your career, especially such a cool position like vice president. And I want to say thank you to everyone who has watched this episode. So yeah, I've been Camryn, this is Kate, thank you for watching.